What is going on? It is Thursday. I have my days mixed up there. It's Thursday. And the big news of the day today was Bobby Wagner signing with the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, he's been a thorn in 49ers fans' sides for the better part of a decade now, and he's going to continue to be so, albeit for a new team. He decides to go to Los Angeles on a 5-year deal. It's being reportedly worth up to $65 million if you hit certain incentives. I would imagine that is much higher than whatever the guarantees are. I haven't seen a guaranteed number yet, but just based on Wagner's age, I would expect that to be probably twice whatever the guarantees might be. I'm sure he secured a hefty amount of guaranteed money in that deal, but I think we have to remember when we look at contracts being signed, the average annual value, the years, the incentives that could be reached, none of that stuff really matters. What really does matter are practical guarantees, and even more than that, guaranteed at signing. Because when we're talking about these long contracts, a lot of times it's just void years. It's ways for them to move money around. So money aside, Bobby Wagner goes to the defending Super Bowl champs. They upgrade at a position where, to be honest with you, they've kind of been lacking in recent years, which makes their recent success all the more impressive, considering they haven't really had standout talent at the linebacker position in any of their recent seasons, in my opinion, at least. So Bobby Wagner is going to immediately give that Rams defense an upgrade. It's going to add a strong veteran presence at the second level. In my eyes, one of the best linebackers of all time, even though, again, he is on the wrong side of 30. He is kind of on the back stretch of his career. I still think offers a tremendous amount of ability on top of the football IQ that's going to come with it. So naturally, the question then becomes, what does this mean for the San Francisco 49ers? That's what most people who are 49ers fans are going to want to know. How is this signing going to impact them? How does this change the landscape of the NFC West? For me, we have to look at the entire picture, because the signing in a nutshell makes the Rams a stronger team, but we also have to look at just the whole outlook of the offseason and how things have gone for the Rams, right? So if we take a look really quickly, the Rams have added Bobby Wagner and they've added Allen Robinson. So when you talk about a defending Super Bowl team adding 2 Pro Bowl level players, you're immediately going to assume that they got better and that they're out being very aggressive, making these big signings, which to an extent is true. But what gets lost in the mix is they lost Von Miller, one of the better pass rushers in the entire league, huge cog in their Super Bowl run, very important piece. Robert Woods gets traded to Tennessee. Robert Woods was just phenomenal for them for so many years. Really good run blocker, could run the whole route tree. They motioned him pre-snap a lot. He was a guy that could do a lot for that Rams team. Darius Williams was one of the better number 2 corners in the NFL. He went from an undrafted free agent to a guy that was a key part of that Super Bowl team as well. They lost Andrew Whitworth, their left tackle, who is one of the better tackles in football and had been for the last few seasons. He retires. It's incredible when you think about the fact that he was playing at the level he was playing at the age of 40. He's no longer there. They lose Johnny Hekker, where, usually you'd like to think losing a punter isn't too big of a deal, but Hekker is one of the better punters the NFL has ever seen, frankly. So that's another thing where even just a little bit of field position could be changing here and there. They lost a starting guard in Austin Corbett. He goes to Carolina. They lost starting defensive tackle in Sebastian Joseph Day. They lost an end in Agbania Okoronkwo to Houston. So this Rams team has lost about nearly 4 times what they've kept, right? So they've lost 8 key players, and they've brought in some other smaller signings. So when we're really looking at this, yes, Bobby Wagner to the Rams makes them better in, the sense of just today, like what's happening right now. But the way this offseason has gone, the 49ers have kind of stayed the same in a lot of ways. And that's the biggest issue that we have, right? There's this debate about the 49ers. Some 49ers fans think they aren't aggressive enough and they haven't done enough and they're not pursuing these big names. And some 49ers fans are content with where they're at. I think that the ideal outcome is somewhere in the middle. And I think that the 49ers staying the same isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, right? Like if we sit here and we think about the fact that they were a play here or there, so a ball bounces their way, they convert some first downs in the fourth quarter of that NFC Championship game. They move the ball a little bit on one of those last couple drives. Like maybe they're in the Super Bowl. Maybe they're the defending champs and the Rams are the ones catching them. So I don't think staying the same is necessarily all that bad. And I think when you factor in that you have the chance to get the more explosive plays just by having a more athletic and physically gifted quarterback, there's also an avenue where the 49ers improve with a very similar roster. They lost some players too. They lost Laken Tomlinson. They lost DJ Jones. They lost some very good players. They lost Raheem Mostert. But they also have some supplemental in-house candidates. They've made some good signings from the outside. They bring in a young corner in Trevarius Ward. They really did a good job adding to that defensive line rotation. You also think about the fact that, well, it wasn't a signing or a trade or an acquisition. You're probably going to get, from what we're hearing, a healthy Javon Kinlaw this season. So you're adding a first-round pick talent into that spot at nose tackle on that interior defensive line to wreak havoc with Eric Armstead. So I think when we look at this, like, yes, the Rams are grabbing headlines. They're the Super Bowl champions. They're the reigning division champions. It's okay to feel like the 49ers are chasing them and they need to make sure that they're keeping pace with them. But I think when we evaluate the rosters top to bottom, the biggest difference really was quarterback play. I think when we look at last season, the 49ers had the deeper roster, in my opinion, and I would argue now they have the deeper roster. The biggest difference is that I think ultimately is the quarterback position, like I just said, and that Aaron Donald, as good as Nick Bosa is, as good as Fred Warner is, as good as Trent Williams is, Aaron Donald might be the best overall player of this generation. So the Rams might be a little bit more top-heavy if we're talking about at the absolute top, breaking down these rosters. But the 49ers, if we're going, 2 through 9, 3 through 10, when we're looking at the top 50 players on each team, that's where the 49ers really have a lot of strength. And that's why, for me, even with these signings of Bobby Wagner and Allen Robinson, knowing they have Matthew Stafford and seeing the level he could play at, I think the 49ers still pose a very serious threat to the Rams' chances of repeating within the division. And if we're looking at the NFC West as a whole, I also think, you can't really count out Arizona. I do think that they sputtered a bit towards the back end of each of the last two seasons. There's some drama going on with Kyler Murray. A lot of people don't take Cliff Kingsbury seriously as a coach, but they still have a very talented team as well. They were pretty banged up down the backstretch too. So I think that it's going to really be a 3-horse race in that NFC West next year. But if I'm the 49ers, I don't feel like I'm so far behind the 8 ball the way this offseason has gone. If I'm in this 49ers front office, I'm feeling pretty good about where we're at now, knowing that we have 9 draft picks to supplement the moves and replace some of these depth pieces that we may have lost and replace some of these starting guys we may have lost. So as of now, yes, Bobby Wagner going to the Rams, again, it's going to steal headlines. Like, I get it. It makes it makes it very easy to, point to the Rams signing big names and make it seem like the 49ers aren't doing enough. But I think the 49ers are being very calculated with the moves that they are making. And again, ultimately what this is always going to come back to is they probably mismanaged this Jimmy Garoppolo situation or had it unfold in a way that they didn't expect or weren't planning for. Because as much as they may say that they're not, it wouldn't have altered the strategy in free agency and they wouldn't be pursuing some of these big names. I'm not saying Bobby Wagner in particular, because I don't think that the need was necessarily there as much as I think it would have been a great addition. But if you look at the $25 million that's being occupied by Jimmy Garoppolo, it did kind of make things more difficult than it needed to be. But the fact that they're still committed to that and making enough quality moves to stay a competent team is where I'm feeling okay if I'm a fan of this team or if I'm somebody that's in this front office making these moves. Because again, I've talked a bunch about how special teams doesn't really excite people. I do think they've made some really key moves to improve their special teams. I think Ray McLeod's a guy that can be not only a gadget player on the offense, but also somebody who can stretch the field for them as well. And for the value they got on that signing, I'm really interested to see what Kyle Shanahan has cooked up for him. So if we're looking at this just as a whole, the 49ers being where they're at now it's a pretty good spot. Like, they're in a spot where they can easily run this back with a solid level of quarterback play. And maybe you get some growing pains from Trey Lance. It's easy to expect that the guy that's in his first year starting might have some bumps down the road as he's getting acclimated to starting regularly in the NFL. but you could also see an outcome where he's also providing you that spark and that explosive playability, and you can kind of take more chances on these shot plays. You can stretch the field a little bit more vertically. You might get more dynamic in the running game. Teams might have to crowd the box a bit more. So the way I'm looking at it, the only scenario where I'm concerned as a 49ers fan is if Trey Lance were to come out the season and be such a downgrade from Jimmy Garoppolo that it's going to ultimately keep you from double-digit wins and keep you out of the playoffs. And I personally don't see that really shaking out that way at this point in time. I could be wrong. Maybe he's really going to have a lot of growing pains, and maybe he's going to have to acclimate and take some more time than I'm expecting. But I think at the end of the day, this scheme is going to take care of so much. So when I'm looking at this division right now, I have to give the Rams the slight edge now, just based on the fact that they have the veteran quarterback. They have the recent division title, and they just won the Super Bowl. So I'm going to give them the respect of saying they probably still are the favorites. But I think the 49ers are right there. And I would expect the closer we get to the season after the draft, when you start seeing odds getting thrown around, they're going to be right there. If I recall correctly, they were like plus 150, plus 175 or so for the division title. They're going to be taken seriously by sports books, and they're going to be taken seriously by these people throwing big money around on these division winners, because I think there is optimism that the 49ers still are a team to be reckoned with in this division. And it's really wild if we go back and we revisit last season, right? The 49ers end up beating the Rams twice in the regular season, including a Week 18 game that they had to win to get in the playoffs, right? Like, they have to win this game. They're down 17-0 at one point. They find a way to win. They beat the team that wins the Super Bowl twice, but they get swept by the Seattle Seahawks, who were an absolute mess and didn't make the playoffs, and they get swept by the Arizona Cardinals, who got embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs. So I know everybody's talking about the AFC West, and for good reason, right? Like, the AFC West is just loaded with superstars now. It's a very talented division. But the NFC West is still a very, very strong division. And the 49ers have constructed themselves in a way that they're not only going to be able to be competing now, but I think for the next couple seasons. And I think it really comes back to, if Super Bowl is your ultimate goal, which I understand for most fans it is, you have to get into the playoffs first. And the best way to get into the playoffs will always be winning your division. It will always guarantee you at least one home game in the playoffs. And I think that the 49ers are positioning themselves very well to continue to make runs at that division title. And this is where the differing philosophies come into play, right? I think that some people are just, hey, we've been this close the last couple of years. We're right there on the cusp. Just go all in, push in all your chips, and go for that Super Bowl trophy. And while I can understand that sentiment, I also think that's much easier if you did have the veteran quarterback. Like, the Rams have Matthew Stafford. For me, it makes more sense when you have that known commodity. As good as I think Trey Lance can be, we haven't really seen ultimately what he's going to be over the course of an entire NFL season. And if you're the 49ers, to me, it makes more sense to not punt this season. I don't want it to sound like that, but it makes more sense to kind of wait to push all your chips in next year when the cap spikes, next year when you see a full year of Trey Lance, when you know this is really the window for us to go in for 3 years left on this rookie deal before we're going to have to work an extension. You're going to have this big cap number, and hopefully Trey Lance is playing so well that your biggest concern will be that cap number. So I get that a lot of people aren't thrilled that the Rams are bringing in these big names and there's these big trades happening, and the 49ers big signing was Travarius Ward. I think it's a great signing. I think that he's somebody that's going to come in. You're getting him in the prime years of his career, generally for a defensive back. You're getting a guy who, to be honest with you, the thing that impresses me the most is that he's very grabby downfield. He's really good at getting his hands on receivers and not getting flagged for it. And I think it's at a point now where that's almost like, it may be bending the rules a bit, but that's a skill set to me that translates. Like, if you're able to do that and get away with it, like, there is inherent value in that. So I think that they did a good job of bringing in a guy who could be the number one corner. And again, they addressed their special teams. They addressed some depth spots. They brought in a rotational guy in Hassan Ridgeway. And it remains to be seen what they'll do at the slot corner position. It remains to be seen what they'll do at safety. But again, my whole take on this is, as much as Bobby Wagner to the Rams is a big deal for them and they should feel good about it, I think 49ers fans should feel fine too. And it shouldn't be something where this move, Bobby Wagner going to, like, this isn't the hill I'm going to die on for saying that the 49ers lost the offseason or that they need to shift their whole philosophy. I really don't think that that's the player that they whiffed on, where I'm sitting here and I'm, just trying to go through the motions, understanding how they could let this fall through their fingers, right? To me, if I'm the Rams, I'm more upset that I lost Von Miller than I am happy that I brought in Bobby Wagner. And that's no disrespect to Bobby Wagner, but this just comes back to positional value for me, right? Like, if you can have that bona fide edge rusher, like we saw Von Miller in the fourth quarter of that NFC Championship. We saw him during the Super Bowl, all throughout the playoffs, really, that game in Tampa. He was a game-changing force for that Rams defense. I don't think the Rams win the Super Bowl last year without Von Miller. If you put Bobby Wagner on that team, I don't know that he's the difference of them winning the Super Bowl or not. And again, I think it just comes back to, even though the Rams linebackers weren't necessarily great, it's not something that's going to push them over the top the way a top flight edge rusher would. And I think losing that edge rusher is something that hasn't been talked enough about by 49ers fans. Really quickly, Chase, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys. Like, subscriptions, any of that. I am trying my hardest to get this up and running. We're about a week and a half in, and I appreciate everybody who stopped by to check out the content and who shared it, anything. I'm going to be doing 49ers related streams as many days as possible. So as of now, I've been doing them every day. I'm going to try to continue that. Tomorrow, nothing set in stone yet. We're going to make sure it works schedule-wise, but tomorrow I do believe Jason Aponte will be on with me, and we'll be doing a little review of how things have gone. So definitely want to tap in for that. But thank you, Chase. I just wanted to say thank you real quick for that. Keith, what's going on, dude? Appreciate you coming by. But yeah, like, this is something that we haven't talked about enough, right? Like, losing Von Miller is a big deal. Losing Andrew Whitworth is a big deal. Andrew Whitworth is phenomenal. And, Trent Williams, rightfully so, got so much shine last season because he had one of the better offensive tackle seasons we've ever seen, right? He was just so good. But it really kind of overshadowed how good Whitworth was. In most divisions, even at 40 years old, Andrew Whitworth would have been the best left tackle in that division. And I think that with, that loss, as much as they have some pieces in place to replace him, and as much as the Rams have done a pretty good job in terms of, keeping their roster afloat by hitting on these mid-round picks, developing these undrafted free agents, that's a big loss. I believe Havenstein is going to end up being the left tackle there now, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. To me, even if he comes in and plays at an average level, that's still a step back from the Pro Bowl level you were getting from a guy like Whitworth. So again, some things that don't get talked about enough. Darius Williams, right? Darius Williams has been so good in that secondary. We talk at length about Jalen Ramsey for good reason, because he is a phenomenal player. And if you guys didn't see this week too, Jalen Ramsey gave a ton of praise. I forget what the specific podcast was, but he was on a podcast and he mentioned Deebo Samuel's name with guys like Devontae Adams at the top, saying that Deebo is in that conversation. When you factor in everything he does on the field. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. It's really cool to see somebody who's revered as one of the best players at his position in this generation showing some love to Deebo Samuel. But again, we talk about Jalen Ramsey, right? And we talk about, how good he is. But what gets kind of lost in the shuffle is Darius Williams. And I do think that Rams secondary took a slight step back already last year because they lost John Johnson and they lost Troy Hill the year before. Now that's going to be 3 starters in 2 seasons that you lose from what was the number 1 defense in 2020. And as good as the Rams have been, it's unrealistic to expect that they're going to be able to just keep churning out high-level talent from, 3rd and 4th round picks and finding undrafted free agents. It's not a sustainable business model. Again, they'll have the talent at the top to keep them afloat. I'm not ever going to give this take that the Rams are, they're on some sort of like hourglass ticking where it's like they're eventually going to run out and they're going to be out of picks and they're just going to be a bad team. I don't foresee that happening. But I do think that there is a level of drop-off in the depth behind their top flight superstar talent at the top of the roster that will affect the outcome of football games. I don't think it takes them from Super Bowl champions to, the cellar in the NFC West, but I do think that it ultimately can be the deciding factor between them or a team like the 49ers ultimately winning that NFC West crown. And I think that's something where if I'm looking at these two teams, it's really going to come down to, can the 49ers get that competent QB play? Because even if they don't get this, high level, like, Matthew Stafford threw 40 touchdowns last year. He had a really good season by all means. I don't think Trey Lance has to match that. But if Trey Lance gives them what they got from Jimmy and maybe just a little bit extra, I have every reason to believe the 49ers can win the division next year. And the 49ers are the team hosting the game in the wild card round. And they're the team that the Rams are chasing throughout this season. So to me, what this really, comes back to is looking at the full picture. And that's where I think there's been a lot of disconnect, because I think that it's so easy to get caught up in the big names. It's so easy to get caught up in, well, my team isn't making these big splash signings and the other team is. This team, doesn't care. And I just don't think that's the case. I think the 49ers have made it very clear that their model is to try to capitalize as much as possible on hitting on draft picks and then retaining their own players. And I think that it's something that, changes year to year. You can't stick to that every single season. Hey, if there's a really good player that's available, you find a way to make it happen. But as of right now, like the way I'm looking at it, I haven't heard a single instance of a player where they're coming out and they're like, I wanted the 49ers and the 49ers told me they couldn't make it happen financially. And what I'm getting at by that is saying that I think a lot of people get it made up in their minds that just because a player signed elsewhere, that it means that the 49ers didn't offer enough, they didn't sell hard enough, they didn't give a good enough sales pitch. And frankly, it overlooks the fact that as much as I think the 49ers are an ideal destination and I think playing in the Bay Area is great and all the wonderful things that come with being a part of that organization, it's not for everybody. And there are other teams out there that are very appealing too. So for like the instance, like Bobby Wagner's from Southern California, I can see the appeal in a guy wanting to go play for the Los Angeles Rams and play in that stadium, play where he's familiar and he grew up, for the team that just won the Super Bowl, for the team that has the proven Pro Bowl talent at quarterback, rather than, taking a lesser role most likely with the 49ers. Like the 49ers have a really crowded linebacker room, and as great as I think the addition would have been, if I remove all attachment that I have to, covering the team and being around the team, I can see why the Rams would be a more preferred destination for a player like that. So I just want to make it clear that I think, just from my opinion, it's unfair that anytime a big name player signs elsewhere, the first thought people have is that John Lynch didn't do enough, or that the front office didn't do enough, or that Jed York didn't want to pay enough. And while they're not exempt from criticism and they are certainly not perfect, I just think that the two things aren't directly related. And that's one thing that I feel like gets completely overlooked. Chandler Jones, for example, was another one. And the 49ers reportedly had interest, but ultimately we heard nothing that said that Chandler Jones was like, man, I really wanted San Francisco and they couldn't make it work. And hey, maybe he comes out in a podcast 3 years from now and tells us that. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that there's 31 other destinations in the NFL, and every player, has different things that make them tick and different things that really appeal to them, not just scheme, not just money. A lot of these guys have family, and it's about, where they're going to live, cost of living, all those things get factored in. And I think that's an area that really does get overlooked when we talk about the 49ers, right? It's really hard to blame it just on, hey, well, there's no, income tax or state income tax in Nevada and there is in California, because we don't know that for sure. But it also wouldn't surprise me with a guy like Chandler Jones, right? Like that's why I think the 49ers are already at a disadvantage when it comes to a lot of these open free agent negotiations, because hey, I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, man. I got my San Jose Sharks shirt on right now. Like I'm from here. I love it here. It's expensive as hell, man. It's ridiculous. And it doesn't change. Even if you're an athlete, like sure, you're making a little bit more money, but I do think that that's something that we need to always keep in the back of our mind, that the same contract the 49ers offer that a team in Florida or a team in Nevada offers, it's not the same. So just, let that marinate. Think about it a little bit, especially if you're somebody who's a little fired up and you're a little like, hey, why isn't John Lynch doing more? For all we know, they could be doing things and they could be offering and they could be throwing out contracts, and players might just not want to come here. So it's not an indictment on the team necessarily. There's a lot of outside factors that go into this. So coming back to my original point with this, right? what does this mean for the NFC West? What does this mean for this team going forward? I think it really doesn't change anything. I think that the 49ers are in a spot now where they've had so many tight battles with the Rams over the last couple seasons that, yes, a player like Bobby Wagner is obviously going to help the Rams. But I think the 49ers were kind of losing that edge that they had for a couple seasons where it felt like schematically they just had a leg up on the Rams. And it felt like for a long time too, they really did a good job eating over the middle of that field in the second level, where the Rams might have been a little, they might not have sunk the amount of resource into their linebacking core that they did elsewhere. We'll put it like that, right? As good as I think Bobby Wagner is, I don't think it moves the needle so much that that's going to be, stopping the 49ers. Maybe if they got a prime Bobby Wagner 5 years ago, that's what we're talking about. But I don't think that it's going to be something that's going to cause them to skyrocket past the 49ers, where we're sitting here and we're like, okay, well, now the Rams are going to win 13 games and the 49ers need to just set their sights on a wild card. They're still right in the thick of this race. I still think anything's possible in this division. I think even Seattle with Drew Lock, knowing that team and that culture and Pete Carroll, they'll find a way to win a game or two, that they probably shouldn't, or they'll upset a team that they probably shouldn't. So ultimately, my whole theme for this video, and again, I just wanted to get something out real quick. We're like 25 minutes in. I don't want to get to a point where I'm rambling and talking in circles because nobody wants to watch that. But my whole point is pretty much that Bobby Wagner to the Rams doesn't change anything for the 49ers. I think the Rams were slight favorites in the division before, and I think they're still slight favorites now. But we do have to talk about the fact that the Rams did lose 4 times what they've brought in when we're looking at recent transactions, right? So that's kind of my whole takeaway with this is, yes, the big names are important. Big names matter. Big names helped the Rams win the Super Bowl last year, and it can't be ignored. But football rosters are 53 players deep, and you need to have that continuity from 10 to 53. Even if the top 10 players on a roster are really good, you need to have some kind of continuity on the bottom. And I think that while the Rams winning the Super Bowl last year makes it, maybe makes that argument fall, not sound as good to some people, I don't think there's a great track record of consistent success and longevity if you're consistently having to swap out those pieces behind these stars. You're consistently having to rotate a bunch of starters. And if we look at the Rams last year, hey, if a couple of things go differently in the NFC Championship game, if a couple things go differently in the Super Bowl, I wasn't a huge fan of the penalty. I think it was Logan Wilson. I apologize if I'm blanking on the Bengals linebacker, but I didn't like the pass interference penalty at the end of the game. Like, a couple things go differently. Sure, the Rams made it to the Super Bowl, but they're sitting here and they didn't win one. It ultimately still comes down to things have to bounce your way. Injuries have to fall into your favor. There's still got to be a couple lucky bounces here and there. These Super Bowls aren't being won in March. And that's really the point I'm trying to hammer home, is that this is a process that's going to evolve over the course of an entire season, of an entire offseason. We still have the draft to go. The 49ers have 9 picks. If they pull out 3 impact players out of this draft, a guy that can start, maybe 2, and another player who's a depth piece, that's a huge win for them. And that's something that's going to help them going forward. That's why I'm not sitting here freaking out on, March 31st that the 49ers lost this offseason and that all hope is lost and the Rams are just going to run the table again. Because I personally don't see it. I think, again, this all is just going to come back to, can the 49ers get the level of QB play they got last year? Because with that, where a lot of people are arguing it wasn't good enough, they were 3 points away from the Super Bowl. I think they can get it. I think they will. I still think the 49ers give the Rams a run for their money in the division. I'm going to wait until closer to training camp before I give specific, division predictions and all that stuff. But the Rams still have a slight edge. It's just that edge didn't really increase all that much for me with Bobby Wagner, considering all the pieces that they lost. So coming up on 30 minutes right now. I appreciate everybody who's watching. If you guys have any questions or thoughts on things, I'm going to go through real quick and try to get to those. If not, I'll probably wrap it up pretty quick, because that's kind of just where my thinking is with this. This signing isn't something that should be freaking 49ers fans out. And hey, if you're a Rams fan, I get it. Bobby Wagner is still a really good player. It's just not something that's moving the needle so much, where the gap now is so large, where it's like, oh, well, this was it. This was fine. The final straw. The 49ers are done for. That's not at all where I'm at, and that's not at all where I think the Rams are looking at it from either. They know they got stronger, but they know they still have work to do, and they know it's still going to be a very, very tough battle to win that NFC West. Keith says that Wagner's more of a threat to Drew Lock. Hey, man, Drew Lock's going to be out there. He's going to have a really tough time if he's the starter. I feel kind of bad for him almost. He's stepping into a tough division. Even that Cardinals defense is pretty tough to deal with. You're going to play the Niners and the Rams twice a year. I think it's not the most ideal situation for anyone stepping into a big role. So yeah, Emiliano's saying if they go next year when the salary cap expands, the decision's a bit meh. Like, I get that. I'm just also of the mindset that, like, realistically, the thing that's holding them up from going all in right now is Jimmy Garoppolo being on the roster. They have made it clear they're not going to get Jimmy Garoppolo off the roster for nothing. They're going to wait until they can try and get something for him. The discussion about whether or not that's the right idea or not is an entirely different one. But knowing who's available, there's not really anything I'm seeing right now that's, they go get this player. Division favorites, Super Bowl favorites. This makes this a Super Bowl season or bust. And I also think, as good as I think Trey Lance can be, it's almost smart to kind of feel things out a bit and wait and see how he's playing on a game-to-game basis as the full-time starter before you really hamstring yourself. And you're already pushing back contracts and you're pushing back money for guys like Kittle and Armstead and Warner, and D Ford still has void years. Like, all that stuff is going to add up eventually, and that's where I'm kind of understanding that they might not be so eager to continue to push it back until they really know what they have. And that might not be factoring into their thinking at all. Maybe that's just my own outlook and that's clouding my judgment of things. But I do think that there's nothing wrong with running back the majority of the roster they had last season, which was a really good roster, adding a couple pieces here and there, supplementing some depth. Hopefully you hit on some guys in the draft. And then, hey, maybe they go next year, they win a game or two in the playoffs again, and Trey Lance looks good. Like, I know Super Bowl is everybody's ultimate goal, but this is the problem to me. The 49ers, they kind of reset the clock a bit when they took Trey Lance, because as good as the current roster is, and as much as they are arguably in a Super Bowl window, considering they were in one in 2019 and they were really close to getting to one just a couple months ago. When you take the rookie and you take the rookie that is, historically has less pass attempts and less experience at the collegiate level than the majority of players taken as high as he has in, NFL history, you are almost kind of pushing back. You're extending the window, but you're also, limiting this like immediate win now window where you're just this team that has to go all in right away and you have to push the money back and just, maybe not compete in a few seasons. That's the thing for me right now, where I can understand them being a little bit more like, hey, like, let's see what we have in Trey Lance first. Let's let him get some growing pains. Let's see what we have. We know what we've with Jimmy Garoppolo, who's a little bit more physically limited than Trey Lance. We've still had tremendous success. So maybe they could match that same success with Trey Lance in year two. I don't think he's going to throw for 50 touchdowns, but maybe he has a similar level of success as a guy driving the offense. And if that makes sense, that like Patrick Mahomes had, where you can come out and you're just out there, executing, hitting your throws, driving a well-oiled machine on offense. And, that Chiefs team, was really close to winning a Super Bowl too. They got within a few plays of making it. I think they would have won if they got there, and they did that with a 32nd ranked defense in the league. I don't think the burden is going to be as large on Trey Lance year one. I think they can kind of get by still being that team that has a really strong defense and still has, a strong running game and all those things. So, yes, if I was running things, I probably would have cut ties with Jimmy Garoppolo and tried my hardest to add another really like an impact edge. If I could have gotten Von Miller, for example, and not saying that Von Miller wanted to come to the 49ers, maybe Buffalo was always his destination. But if I had a chance to sell Von Miller on coming to the 49ers, I'm taking less pressure or more pressure off of Trey Lance and giving less pressure to the guy who's in his first year starting, knowing that I'm going to have Nick Bosa and Von Miller terrorizing opposing offensive lines. And you're going to have this defense that was top 3 last year, top 5 each of the 2 years before that. And you can get by being that really strong, complete team it just doesn't seem to be the way they're going. And while I may disagree with it, I can kind of understand the logic behind it, if that makes sense. So that's kind of just my point with that. Nicholas says, we're so lucky that the 49ers have these unique stars, Debo, Bosa, Trent, Kittle, Warner, Juszczyk. That's some other news. Juszczyk's option he will be back next season as well. I believe there are some void years because it's through 2025, if I recall correctly, but I think there are some void years on that contract. I would have to double check to verify. My apologies for not being exact right now. But yeah, like they have a very strong core of blue chip talent. And that's one thing that I think gets lost in the shuffle is that like a lot of these teams are scrambling to sign big name players because they don't have them or they don't have enough of them. The 49ers have blue chip talent. They have a core of strong players. Sure, you can never have too many. If you can get more, you absolutely do it. But the 49ers aren't starved for talent. And a lot of the takes that I see, they really come across like this is a team that's, coming off a 5-12 season and they're, so devoid of star power. How dare you let Bobby Wagner and Chandler Jones sign elsewhere? We need those players. Hey, the 49ers have some really good talent that they brought in-house, that they scouted, they drafted, they developed. And I think that provides a certain amount of equity and optimism that they could be able to do it again. So I agree with you, Nicholas. I think that having that core of really talented players is important. On the flip side, I think Trent Williams is their best player. And while a lot of the players on this team are pretty young, Trent Williams is in his mid-30s. There's no guarantee he plays till he's 40 like Andrew Whitworth. So I do also see the flip side of that where you'd want there to be some urgency to maximize. You don't know how long you're going to have this strong core of really good players. But regardless of where you feel the Super Bowl window is or what's going on, one thing that can't be disputed is that the 49ers do have an extremely strong group of blue chip talent at the top of their roster. And arguably one of the, again, if we're talking like 1 through 10 on a roster, 1 through 8, whatever, the 49ers, in my opinion, match up with just about anybody. The only real question mark still is quarterback position. Like I can't fault somebody who's maybe not close to the 49ers for not thinking that Trey Lance is going to be a top 10 quarterback from year one and going to come be an MVP candidate from year one. I completely see how that's fair. But if the 49ers hit on Trey Lance and he looks like that guy in the next couple of seasons while that core is still intact, the 49ers become the team to beat in the NFC and they become one of the teams to beat in the NFL. And I think that was the ultimate goal when they moved up to made that pick. Now we have to see how it plays out. But you make that pick knowing the rest of your roster is so strong in the meantime that it can keep you afloat while you redshirt Trey Lance for a year, while he starts for a season and get acclimated. I know that Lombardi trophies are what people really want. People want to win the Super Bowl. The 49ers won the Super Bowl 6 months after I was born. I've never seen one, okay? The last time they won one, I was not on this earth. I get it. I understand the hunger for wanting to win a Super Bowl. But there's a lot of teams that would be thrilled to play in the conference championship 2 out of 3 years. There's a lot of teams that would love to go to a Super Bowl and watch their team participate in the greatest event in sport, even if they're not winning it. And maybe that's just my blindly optimistic take. And maybe somebody's sitting there and they're like, dude, shut up. I don't care. I want to win Lombardi. Stop making excuses. That's fine. I'm just throwing it out there that the 49ers have been able to compete. And even with their weird plan that I said halfway through last season, I'm like, this feels like they double dipped too hard and they went they bit off more than they could chew, having Jimmy start now while also having Lance and not addressing a need and also depriving themselves of draft picks. It just seemed like a total mess. And they made me look like an idiot. They went on a playoff run. They got within a few points of the Super Bowl and they darn near made it. So I just think that there is a level of success with that strong core of blue chip players that exists. And I think that has to have been something that factored into their decision to move up for Trey Lance, knowing that this wasn't going to be a situation where, yes, we're moving up for this rookie, but our timeline moves as the rookie does. They still can be a very competitive team, even if Trey Lance just plays at a very league average level. If he's an average, top 15, 16 quarterback, if he's somewhere between 14 and 18 next year, if we're ranking quarterbacks 1 through 32, the 49ers, in my eyes, win 10 or 11 games and they're in the playoffs. And to me, that is a great start. That's where you want to be year after year. You're not going to win the Super Bowl every season. I'm sorry. It's not that easy. And I think the Patriots distorted everybody's not everybody's, but the Patriots distorted a lot of people's perception of how hard it is to not only like make the Super Bowl, but win them. They rattle off 6 of them in 20 years and they're in one every other season. So people are just like, oh, well, the Super Bowl is the ultimate goal. The Patriots do it every year. Like, why can't we? It's an extremely one-off thing in sports. And I think just getting to the playoffs consistently is something that is how you build a culture of being a successful team, of being a team that's going to be in the mix. And when you're putting yourself into that position to be in the playoffs where you might get a ball bounce away. Think about this past season. I think the Green Bay Packers were a better team top to bottom than the 49ers were. They had the reigning MVP who's gone back-to-back winning MVP, and the 49ers won that game for a lot of reasons, but they don't win that game without Jordan Willis blocking a field goal and blocking a punt. Little things like that are really what's going to shape these outcomes when January football comes around. And I think that when we're looking at the 49ers now, they're still a team that can do that. They're still a team with Trey Lance playing at an average level, have shown they can go into Lambeau in January. They can go on the road and win these games in Dallas in these, tough, hostile environments against good teams because they're so well-rounded. And that's where I'm at with this, where I'm like, I still see this window being there. I just don't think it's Super Bowl or bust. If the 49ers were to go 10-7 again next year, maybe 11-6, and they win a game in the playoffs, and Trey Lance looks like a guy who got better week after week and really showed some big strides and improvement, guess what? You're going into 2023, and your quarterback is on a rookie deal at 23 years old with 2 years of NFL experience under his belt and a year's worth of starting games. That's where we can start placing this emphasis on Super Bowl or bust. That's when we can start talking about, all right, this is a championship team. This is the expectation, no less than this. But I do think that there is a level of readjustment that we need to make, knowing that this is going from a team that had a veteran quarterback who'd been in the league for 8 years to now a guy who will be starting for the first time, and the challenges that come with that. And I think that that's where we need to temper expectations a little bit collectively. And, I'm never going to tell anybody else how to feel, but I think you'll be much more satisfied at the end of the season if your expectation is, hey, let's just get into the playoffs and see what happens, rather than Trey Lance needs to win the Super Bowl the very first year that he's starting, because the odds of that happening aren't great. It's really hard to do. The odds of the Rams going back and winning the Super Bowl next year aren't great, even in an NFC that's much weaker. So that's just kind of where I'm at with that. And I hope maybe that, helps some people, even if they don't change their mind or they don't see eye to eye with me, maybe they can ponder on a different outlook on this and think about, hey, you know what, maybe making the playoffs next year and winning a game on the road isn't the worst thing in the world. Like, hey, I'll tell you what, it was a bummer they lost in the NFC Championship game. Getting to write stories about this team in the playoffs for Niners Nation and getting to do some coverage on them during this playoff run, I had an absolute blast doing it. And it just reminded me how much more special those games in January are than these games in October and November are during the regular season. And hey, if it comes up short, that's the kind of thing you should be striving for every year. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm some expert on the, glory day 49ers, but they were a team that was in the mix constantly every year. And a lot of those seasons, even when they came up short, you felt like it really could be their year and they could make some noise in the playoffs. And I think that getting back to that point should be the primary goal, because once you do that, hey, maybe the Super Bowls follow. Maybe they do start rattling off a couple appearances. Maybe Kyle does get a couple of rings. Trey Lance does become this talent, but it's never going to happen without building a foundation of being that team that's going to get there consistently. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. If anybody has any, comments on that, if they think that I'm way off base, I'd love to hear about it. Let's talk about it. But I do feel pretty strongly about that. That's something for me where I'm very, locked into this mindset that, hey, making the playoffs is a big deal. This team had that really nice run under Jim Harbaugh. Then they were really bad for a few seasons. And then they make the playoffs with Kyle. Then they get injured a bunch. Then they make the playoffs again. Like, this roller coaster isn't conducive to long-term success. Being a team that gets there every season is when you're going to get on one of these playoff runs eventually where, hey, the ball does start bouncing your way. These little magical things like we saw this past playoffs, they start going your way 2-3 games in a row, and maybe we're sitting here talking about the 49ers rattling off the Super Bowl in a year that you didn't expect it. So again, that's kind of where I'm at with that. And, ultimately, I'm not going to blame anybody for wanting to win the Super Bowl. Like, hey, I watch football to see my team win the title. I get it. But if you're, your dreams are going to be crushed and you're going to be, just devastated if your team doesn't win the Super Bowl. You're going to be pretty sad most seasons watching football. To me, I don't enjoy watching sports that way because it's just not going to make me feel good if that's my expectation year after year. So I get it. It's just, that's my, rant, monologue, whatever you want to call it about, Super Bowl being the end all be all of things. James Foster is asking, is there a difference between Reader and Wagner in coverage? Yes. So James is asking about Troy Reader. He took the most snaps for the Rams at inside linebacker last season. I think that while Bobby Wagner is getting up there in age and he may not have the same amount of explosiveness that he once did, he still is an upgrade over Troy Reader. And I do think we see a little bit better improvement from the Rams in terms of, when they're sinking in zone coverage at the second level in between the hashes. If he does have to run with a tight end or a running back, I'm of the belief where I still think Warner has it. I think that there's a clear difference between Bobby Wagner now and Bobby Wagner a few years ago. I don't, however, think he's like washed or cooked or whatever adjective wants to get thrown around that I've seen a bunch. I still think he's a very good player, and I think that he is a pretty solid upgrade over what they got from Reader and Ernest Jones last season. So I'll be interested to see who ends up sticking at that spot next to him because they're going to be in sub packages most of the time. So a lot of the time there's going to be two linebackers on the field. I would expect it to be Reader and Wagner. Maybe it's Jones and Wagner, but I think we can, knowing the money they gave out and the player that he is, we can pretty safely assume that Wagner will be one of them. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that other spot. Keith thinks that Trey Lance will be 1,000 times better than Lamar Jackson. For those of you who don't know, I'm a big Lamar Jackson guy. So if Trey Lance can be the same player as Lamar, not the same player, but if he can provide the same level of output and production and impact on an offense, even in different ways, because I don't think anybody's really running the way Lamar does, that's a massive victory for the 49ers. If Trey Lance is 80% of Lamar Jackson, that's a massive victory for the 49ers. So if we get 1,000 times, look out. The 49ers might not ever lose a football game for the rest of their days. Hendricks is asking, what are my top free agents that are left? It's still slot guys for me. Callahan and Harris Jr., the slot guys for me, are still number one and number two. They're guys that make sense for the 49ers. Maybe the 49ers are fine rolling with what they have and they brought back Denard. Maybe they really do think Denard can be a good slot corner. Maybe Dante Johnson takes that role. I don't know. I know John Lynch mentioned that they drafted Diamador Lenore with the expectation that he had traits to play nickel. So maybe he takes a leap forward and really, seizes that role. I just am of the mindset where, and I like Lenore a lot. I think he's a good player. I liked him before the draft. I did a bunch of mock drafts last year, and on the final one I published, the only two players that I got correct were Trey Lance and Lenore for my mock. So I've been a believer in his for a long time, but I also understand that there is a level of objective comfort you get from a proven product at the NFL level, right? Like if you get a guy like Chris Harris, who's been there, who's been a big part of a Super Bowl team, you get a guy like Callahan, who's been in a really good secondary and been one of the better slot corners and can run with guys one-on-one, run with players like Jamar Chase and, hold their own. There's inherent value in that. And, at that point you make that signing and your worst problem is, wow, I spent this money and Diamador Lenore is so good that we might have to, get him on the field over the guy we signed in free agency. Hey, if that's your biggest problem, you're cooking. And the way we've seen 49ers players get hurt and the way we've seen that secondary thinned out in recent years, having too many viable cornerbacks, if that's your biggest problem, I think you take that any day of the week. So those would be the guys for me. I'm a big Jadeveon Clowney guy. I think Clowney in the right system, and he's still one of the most physically gifted and physically imposing edge rushers in the entire league. You get Clowney in the right situation, I still think he's a really good player. I think he's a bit too rich for the 49ers, 49ers pockets right now. I think that it's a bit too rich for their blood. They're not going to pay for it. Like they don't have that much cap space to work with. They're kind of, in limbo with this Jimmy situation. They're going to have to get creative to sign their draft picks. I don't think Clowney's coming, but if we're talking about just top free agents left overall, he's up there for me big time. Gilmore's another guy. I still think Gilmore has it, to be honest, for how much it seems like he's holding out for. I can't say that I would pay it confidently. I still think he's a good player, but again, when you're getting into signing guys for what they did a year ago, 2 years ago, and they're in their mid 30s, early 30s, entering the latter portion of their career. It gets really messy really quick. I personally would try to avoid that, which is why I am actually very impressed that the 49ers made their big splash, Travarius Ward. They probably could have signed Gilmore to a very similar deal, and fans might have been more excited right off the rip hearing the name Stephon Gilmore than Travarius Ward, but they're banking on a guy who's younger, who still has that, burst being in his mid-20s and hasn't had the extensive injury history. So those would definitely be my guys. Hendrick is saying our splash signings will be Debo and Bosa. And hey, that's a good way to look at things, right? Like last season, Trent Williams gets brought back on this record-setting deal for offensive linemen. And even though he had played for the 49ers the year before, he still was a free agent on the open market that they signed and brought back. So it kind of also dispels the narrative that the 49ers aren't willing to make big signings. I think it, again, points to the fact that they've been pretty good at keeping their own talent, or bringing in their own talent, keeping their own talent. The example, obviously, that would counter that is DeForest Buckner. But now that we're sitting here looking at this, the way it was spun was that where they were at financially, it was Buckner at the money he wanted, or it was Jimmy Ward and Eric Armstead. And I think the world of DeForest Buckner. I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's a great leader. I spent a bunch of time around some people who were really close that either cover the Colts organization or around them when I was in Indianapolis. They think the world of DeForest Buckner. But if we're looking at this from a roster construction standpoint and how to build the team, I'm taking Eric Armstead and Jimmy Ward as a pair over DeForest Buckner on his own 10 times out of 10 without an ounce of hesitation. I think last season, Eric Armstead outplayed DeForest Buckner. And I think that that's, maybe up for debate. Maybe some people don't agree with me, but when you throw in Jimmy Ward as the kicker too, like I can't sit here and say that they completely messed up that situation. Hey, if there was an avenue to them keeping Buckner and having those other two guys, sure, you take that every single time. But again, the way it was presented was that it was those two or the other, and that was the decision they ended up making. I don't think it's as egregious as people make it out to be, if that's really how it was played out. Maybe that's just, word salad they threw around for people like me to be gullible and buy it. But I think that there is nothing wrong with maintaining a really strong core on your defense and keeping a player like Jimmy Ward, who finally is getting love from 49ers fans after all these years, who's been long deserving of a lot of love from 49ers fans, and being able to retain a guy like Armstead, who we saw kick inside and really jumpstart this 49ers defensive line when he started rushing the passer from the 3-tech on the inside, and has the ability to kick to the edge and play on the edge on base downs and do a good job stopping the run. So what Hendricks is saying is spot on. They bring back Bosa, they bring back Debo. Hopefully they get both done. Maybe they get none done, but I think they'll at minimum get one of these guys taken care of during this offseason period. And I'd imagine that it's Debo because he doesn't have the 5th-year option that Bosa does. Nor do I think he has as compelling of a case to get broken off financially the same way that Bosa does, just based purely on positional value and the way the NFL is paying receivers and paying edge rushers. I think Bosa is going to be one of these guys that gets I think he'll be the first player to get that's a non-quarterback to get guaranteed over $100 million at signing, which means that no matter what, he's getting that money. It's guaranteed. It's not incentive-based. It's not performance-based. It's not based on health. He's getting $100 million when his name goes from that pen and gets put on that paper. So, yeah, I agree, Hendricks. And I think that's, hey, if you were coming away with Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel in an offseason, that's a win. And I understand that, fans want these big names, but this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like with the Rams, sure, they brought in Allen Robinson and Bobby Wagner, but you're also now having to scramble to replace the production of a top 10 edge rusher, replace the production of a top 10 left tackle, replace the production of a really good corner and a really good nose tackle, a really good receiver, a great punter. Like the net loss is much larger than the net gain that you've had in this offseason. And I think that the 49ers being able to retain their own talent is something that you shouldn't just, ignore, and we shouldn't just sweep under the rug. So I think that's a really good point, Hendricks. Keith is saying draft day trade for JC Tretter. I think JC Tretter is a great player, but if everything I'm hearing means Alex Mack is coming back, and I think Alex Mack's a heck of a player too. And I think that Alex Mack has a year within this specific system, this specific offense. He's worked with Kyle before, loved in the locker room. Kittle was just with them overseas in Ireland for a few days. He's a guy that the locker room responds to and really likes. And I think that he's a known commodity. So no disrespect to JC Treader. If Alex Mack is coming back, I think they're more than set keeping Alex Mack. Let's see if we have anything else. Am I scared of Dallas, or aren't I scared of Dallas? Yeah, I think Dallas has a really good team, and I think that the 49ers beating them in last year's playoffs kind of, that's what happens. Hey, your team beats another team, you're going to immediately jump to, I'm not scared of them. I don't, who cares? They don't, strike fear into me. They're a really good team. They have a good quarterback. They have a good skill position group. Their offensive line's going through a bit of change, and it's going to need to be revamped a little bit. But I think they can still score points with the best of them. I think that they have a really, really good, budding superstar in Micah Parsons, who's a really good player. And I think that Dallas has a very compelling case. They're going to be in a division that's probably not the greatest. I could be way off base saying that now. Maybe this looks really stupid 8-9 months from now. But they're playing Washington, Philadelphia, and the New York Giants 6 times next year. And no disrespect to any of those teams, I think the NFC East is by far the most winnable division in football. So Dallas, if they handle business outside of that division, they're looking at a path where that 1 seed for them isn't crazy to think about. Like, they were a really good team for the majority of the last couple seasons, and they're now playing in a division that's much, much weaker in my eyes than the other ones. The NFC South is kind of there too, but I think the East does still provide a little less resistance than those teams in the South will against the Bucks, who I imagine will be the favorite down there. So, yeah, I think they're a good team. But again, hey, the 49ers, when you have to go in Dallas and play them in the playoffs next year potentially, and you have to go take that team on in January, you kind of have that belief like, hey, we did this last year. We came in this building and we handled business. So that again comes back to what I was saying earlier, where we talk about making the playoffs and building that culture, building that identity. That stuff does carry over. Like, sure, we can't quantify. There's no statistic we can point to that says, Deebo Samuel's gonna, go dominate Dallas because we saw him go and be a part of a winning effort there the year before. But there is a tangible value in having players who've been there and who've done that. And I think that that's where getting to the playoffs year after year really does pay its dividends, because the 49ers might be on the road again in the playoffs. They might be a 6 or a 7 seed, and they can now go in and feel pretty good knowing, hey, we did this before, we can do it again. So yeah, I think Dallas is definitely a team to be taken very seriously, but I wouldn't say I'm scared of them. Like, if I'm the 49ers, I'm not scared of anybody. There's no team out there that I think is so much more talented, or the talent gap is so large where I'm thinking I don't have a shot. I think the 49ers can genuinely take on any of the 31 other teams in the NFL. And I think there's very few teams that you can actually say that for, where every Sunday coming in, you feel like they have a chance to win. And I think the 49ers are in that position this year for sure. Let's see. James says the 49ers need an edge guy like Darrell Taylor from Seattle. Hey, I like Darrell Taylor a lot, and I'm assuming you need kind of like a speed guy with bend who can play that like natural Leo that can be that 9 tech on the outside. I would be in agreement there. I think that the 49ers would do very well to have a more natural speed rusher and a guy that's a little bit more just quick off the get off and just pure speed rush, rather than somebody that's going to be relying on strength and technique and bull rush and whatnot. So if that's where you were going with that, James, I definitely agree with you on that. I think that's a definitely interesting case. Keith is saying that he thinks the most likely to go 14-3 and lose on the game in playoff is Dallas because of playing in the weak East. That's a fair point. That's definitely something that I think you can make the case that playing in a softer division makes it harder once you do get into the playoffs. This is tough because there's a lot of guys that I really like. I think right now, the most underrated to me, and again, I'm a little biased because I think this player is very good, and I'm standing by what I've seen with my own eyes, and I'm standing by what my own evaluations tell me. I still think that it is Leon O'Neal Jr. out of Texas A&M. I think Leon O'Neal is a guy that's being projected in like the late 3rd, 4th. I've even seen him mocked in the 5th round. He's a guy who I think is a easily top 100 talent, and he's somebody who I think could come in from day one and start for a team like the 49ers. Has the IQ, the understanding of angles, the situational understanding in big moments, can cover, can tackle, can get out in space, is good against the run, good at filling gaps. He just does everything, and he did so in a tough SEC on a pretty good Texas A&M team. Looked good in a big game at home where they upset the #1 team in the country in Alabama. At the time, they were #1. And he's a guy that I really like. Another safety I like that I think is getting a lot of love from people who are really in the draft, community, and people who are really plugged into scouting and looking at these players, but I haven't seen from like national media and stuff like that, is Nick Cross out of Maryland. He's another safety who I really like. Tested really well, ran in the 4.3s during his 40-yard dash in Indianapolis. So he's a guy who I really like. So those are the two for me, the two safeties. Leon O'Neal Jr. and Nick Cross would be the two guys for me. Shout out to my guy, Brad. He's been a big D'Angelo Malone guy out of Western Kentucky. D'Angelo Malone's another guy who looks really good. A lot gets made about Arnold Ebiketie for good reason, the edge rusher out of Penn State. But I think his teammate, Jesse Luketa, is really good too. He's another guy I could see in those middle rounds that could find a role as a rotational pass rushing guy and could fit in on a lot of teams and make an impact relatively soon too. So those would kind of be my my players right now. James says that the Rams are a different team with Stafford than Goff. Running game is much less part of game plan. That's very true. The Rams were going empty quite a bit last year. They were going out and throwing the ball 40, 45 times a game. They weren't relying. I think if you remember that Sunday night game, was it Saturday night game? I believe it was when the Niners beat the Rams week 16 in 2019. That game where they converted the back-to-back 3rd and longs and Robbie Gould kicks the field goal and the Niners win. I'm pretty sure Jared Goff had like 32 play action dropbacks in that game where they were literally having him drop back off a play action over 30 times. That's like unheard of to me. It's just absurd. But it's because I feel like Jared Goff was so dependent on having the run set up the passing game through the play action, where with Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay was pretty much like, all right, man, this is what we're going to do. We're going to run these route combinations. We're going to put you in shotgun, go out with 3-4 wide receivers, and pretty much just let you cook, let you throw the ball 40 times a game. So I agree. The philosophy definitely changed quite a bit. I'm with you on that. So I definitely agree. So to put a bow on all of this, I appreciate everybody who stayed for the entirety of this or popped in and out. And for anybody who's just popped in, to put a bow on this, the 49ers are still a team that is going to need to be taken seriously within their division. They're still a team who has a fantastic shot at winning the division. They're still a team who has a shot at, I wouldn't be surprised if they're 7th, 8th, somewhere in that area when Super Bowl odds come out. Because again, we don't know what they have in Trey Lance yet, right? Nobody can say for certain, but based on the glimpses we've seen, based on the college tape that I've broken down, what I've gotten to see in person, I feel pretty comfortable in saying that if they get just that consistently high floor where you can just get like a certain amount of consistency week to week, everything else will take care of itself. And the 49ers are still a team that in my eyes are a 10, 11 win team at minimum. I don't say at minimum, sorry. They're a 10 or 11 win team in reality to me. Like they're a 10 or 11 win team should things go right and should there not be, a rash of injuries or something major happening during the season. And the Rams are kind of in that same mold. If I'm projecting the Rams, I'm saying 11-6, 12-5 right now. So the head-to-head obviously will play a big role in this. I don't know that the 49ers will be able to sweep them again for the 4th consecutive season, but they do have a chance to separate themselves in those games because I think both teams will handle business outside of that. But ultimately, Bobby Wagner to the Rams. Yes, the Rams linebacking group got better. The Rams, as currently constructed, did get better, but the Rams of a month and a half ago that won the Super Bowl have objectively taken a step back in my eyes when we're just weighing additions and subtractions to that roster. So that's the context that I think is really important here. And I think you could argue the 49ers have lost some guys that maybe had them take a little step back, but where we stand now, I still think both of these teams will be vying for that NFC West title, and they both have a great shot at it. So unless there's any other questions or anything else anybody else wants to get to, I'm probably going to go ahead and wrap it up with that. I will be back tomorrow. I believe I will be joined by Jason Aponte. I'm going to shoot for like 6 o'clock or so Pacific time. So if you guys want to come by, maybe I can get him a little fired up, before he comes on live, and we'll get you guys spicy aponte on a Friday night. We'll see how it goes. But thank you to everybody who tuned in. Again, if you like the video, I really appreciate any likes. If you're new and you like the content, please subscribe. Help spread the word to anybody you know who might be interested in 49ers stuff. I'm really doing my best to try to get the channel up and going, but it does take a lot of help from the outside. So I am very grateful for anybody who helps doing that. So yeah, and tomorrow, like I said, tap in. Spicy Aponte will be in the building. I'm, thrilled to have an A-lister on the channel. And until then, we'll just, like I said, call it how it is and say that right now, long way to go in the offseason. Rams got a good player. 49ers are still a good football team too. Both things can be true. So I'm going to go